You had, I think, an incredibly fun and diverse beginning to your music journey. I heard somewhere that one of the things that made you fall in love with music was listening to guitar solos, some epic guitar solos. What's an early guitar solo that you remember you connected to spiritually, musically, where you're like, wow, there's magic in this?
Well, the first solo that I learned was Hey Joe. It was actually a good beginner song, when I first started playing the guitar, because it has pretty simple chords, right? So it's like E, C, G, D, A.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned the solo, and I figured out it's like, oh, see, it's this pentatonic scale, E minor pentatonic scale. I didn't know that's what it was called, but I learned this thing, and it's like, whoa, he's just in this one shape here. Now, you couldn't go look anything up. If you could figure out the notes, you noticed that there was a little pattern to it. And then I got so obsessed with it, and I showed my younger brother, John, who started playing guitar right at the same time I did. So I was 14, he was 11. And I would play rhythm for him for 5 minutes while he would solo over Hey Joe. And then as soon as I'd start soloing, he'd throw the guitar down. Then we get in a fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mom eventually was like, what is going on here? And I was like, John won't play rhythm. John won't play rhythm for me. She's like, okay, I'll play rhythm for you. What are the chords? And I was like, okay, it's like E, C, G, D, A. And so my mom would literally play rhythm for 20 minutes while I'd play.
#parenting.
That's amazing. When I look back on it now, my mom's been gone for 10 years now. When I look back on it, it's like, my God, my parents were so cool.
We should mention that Hey Joe and Hendrix in general is kind of known for the rhythm not being simple rhythm, just the chords that you mentioned.
Right.
It's what you do with those chords. It's almost improvisation in the rhythm side.
He did all those really cool chord fragments, riffs and things like that. That's just part of that's the Hendrix style.
What do you think? I mean, many people put Hendrix as the greatest guitarist of all time. What do you think is part of that?
I make lists.
You do. If you somehow don't know who Rick Beato is, go on YouTube right now and watch your excellent interviews with musicians, watch your breakdown and analysis of different songs, and watch your top 20 lists where you're very opinionated, sometimes very openly critical about certain kinds of song. It's fun. Opinions are fun. I know.
But they do change, Lex, from day to day.
Yeah, exactly.
But anytime I do a list, if I do 20, I like to do 20 because that gives me some leeway to throw in. I have to throw in something that is so weird that people, something that a lot of people won't know, just to have it on there so I can at least introduce I'll put somebody like Alan Holdsworth, who's a famous fusion guitar player. I'll throw in one of his solos or something, just some oddball solo in there, just so that people, as they're listening down the list, will get exposed to something they would not necessarily get exposed to.
Yeah, a lot of variety. But Hendrix, did you show up here today, Rick, trying to tell me that Hendrix is not up there? I just am getting that vibe right now.
No, I'm not. But I don't want to say greatest. You can say, well, there are people that inspired Jimi Hendrix,
Mm-hmm.
Charlie Christian, older guitar players. Charlie Christian and Django Reinhardt were the first two really big, and Andre Segovia were three of the giants of the 20th century as far as guitar influences for most of the players that were to follow.
So here, going to Perplexity, Django Reinhardt was, of course, a jazz guitarist and composer, active mainly in France, and is widely regarded as one of the greatest guitarists in jazz history.
So Django was, there's a huge movement right now, gypsy jazz movement, as they call it, that is kind of built around this style of music that he played back in the early 20th century. One of the things about Django is that he was in a fire, and he had two of his third and fourth finger, so his ring finger and pinky were essentially melted together. He had no use of them, although he could use them while he was chording. But a lot of these incredibly fast lines, he's just playing with two fingers. And it's amazing.
That what is that? So that's gypsy jazz.
That's gypsy jazz, yeah. Him, Stefan Grappelli, was a violinist that played with him a lot.
How much of this is improvisation?
Everything he's doing there is improvised.
Feels so free.
Yeah.
And fun, like swing. And then that leads to, you said pre-bebop. So bebop was the kind of jazz that was also influential on you in your own life journey. And it's this complicated, legendary kind of jazz that was very influential on the music that followed. So what was bebop?
Well, after the big bands were happening in from the 20s through the 40s, small people would go out and play in small groups that they would tour with. And Charlie Parker, who's really kind of one of the main figures of early bebop, really developed the language of it. Usually the music that they're playing over are standard chord progressions that they would use as vehicles to improvise over. A lot of them were AABA form. And Charlie Parker created this language of improvisation that was far more sophisticated than the swing players of the big band era. Think of people like Benny Goodman of that era. They would have really fast tempo songs, angular lines, chromaticism, things like that, chromatic notes.
Chromatic notes are just notes next to each other on the fretboard.
I like to think of it as connecting notes.
Connecting. You're putting in more notes than are supposed to be there, and so creating some interesting texture.
Yeah, so that is one of the most difficult styles to master because all these things are a language.
Yeah.
Blues playing, they're all just languages, right? It's like just like you'd learn any type of language. My dad loved bebop. Now, when I was a little kid and he's listening to these bebop records, whether it's Charlie Parker or Dizzy Gillespie or Oscar Peterson, Joe Pass, great jazz guitar player, I'm just hearing this stuff. I don't know any different. My dad was not a musician, but for some reason, he liked incredibly sophisticated music that was very technical. And I just heard it and just was like, oh, yeah, okay, cool. And not realizing that it was developing my ear because bebop is one of the hardest to improvise in that style, in that language of bebop. It's very difficult to do. And hearing it as a kid is one of the things that I think enables you, just like languages, enables you to learn it as opposed to somebody that's never been exposed to it and tries to learn it as a teenager. So I think it's very similar to learning languages, which kind of is like my theory on perfect pitch, that every child is born with perfect pitch and they start to lose the ability around 9 months when people become culturally bound listeners, when babies do. They start out as citizens of the world. They have the neural pathways to hear the sounds, the phonemes of all 6,500 languages spoken on Earth. But then around 9 months, they begin to lose that ability. And when they become these culturally bound listeners, there's a great YouTube video with this woman, Patricia Kuhl. She's a language researcher. And I watched this, The Linguistic Genius of Babies. I saw this in 2010, this lecture that she did, like a TED Talk. And she talks about this, that kids, they did an experiment. They exposed kids to Mandarin 3 times a week for 25-minute sessions, just a person speaking Mandarin to these babies. And they were able to recognize the sounds, the phonemes of that language, even later on. And when I realized that my son Dylan had perfect pitch, I thought, why does Dylan have perfect pitch, but no one in my family had ever had perfect pitch? And I thought, well, it must be because of the things I exposed to him prenatally and then in the first 9 months of his life, because it's the only way I could explain it.